Well, I mean, I remember I just wanted to be like the Colts. I didn't care if nobody else accepted me or not. These people liked me for who I was, and I would have I would have sacrificed myself to be their friends, to be friends with them.
Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Artie, how you doing?
Good, man. I'm excited for the conversation. I'd already told you I don't know exactly how to introduce you. I know you are a lover of art, philosophy, music, and you are a business owner, entrepreneur, and you do amazing work with metal. You make art with metal, which is amazing. Aside from that, anything else you'd like listeners to know about you?
I uh, I like your heading. You're a curious person is sort of what you put out there. I think that's why I like the things I like artwork and music and business owners, because I'm curious as well. Maybe not as much as you, but anything that is, take some thought, put some effort in and get some good result back. I'm all for that.
Yeah, I resonate with your curiosity. I think that's why we tend to vibe so well. I've always enjoyed interacting with you, and we've interacted on spaces a lot. So, like I was saying before, like we've never really interacted over video before, so it's a little different. It's kind of cool. Um, you have an amazing story. You have a really interesting story. So, I'd love to dive into that a bit, and then happy to talk about just about anything. So, anything that comes up in thoughts along that is cool. So why don't we start from the beginning? Like you weren't born into an Amish Mennonite cult, but your mom eventually joined it. So I think that'd be kind of cool to talk about if you can kind of give a little bit of backstory there, and then we could talk about like some of the specific stuff that happened, and you cover this on your YouTube channel too, but I just find it a really interesting story. So some of it's funny, some of it's like, oh wow, that's kind of crazy that they were doing that. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about that. So I'd love for you to give some background there.
Sure, sure. And anytime I seem to leave a gap, just stop me and ask me to fill in the blanks. But no, I was born in South Texas, close to Del Rio, between San Antonio and Del Rio. And uh, I guess up until the time I was 5, I was just a normal kid, just like, any other 5-year-old out there. And my mom had, I guess her mother committed suicide and was a very troubled person. And so I think that stuck with my mom. She was in foster homes and had a sort of a rough growing up experience. And so, at 5 years old, I wasn't able to look up and say, oh, mom's struggling. But looking back now, I can see that she was looking for meaning in her life. And I think she felt guilty for her mom. I don't know that I could promise that, but that's what it seems like. And so she turned to religion. Um, before she was like, trying to party all the time, drink, smoke, go to dances. And then I guess she said, no, this isn't the way. So she was looking for something. She went to a palm reader, and because she's searching here, and the palm reader was like a scary accurate. Uh, anyway, so she gets into homeschooling because she says the schools are corrupt, which I guess she's probably in part accurate on that. But in order to homeschool, you have to have a good curriculum. I don't know if any parent that's able to make their own. So she finds these Mennonite school books. And as she's teaching, she sees all these pictures of women wearing dresses and coverings and the men, dressed in formal wear all the time. And she's like, oh, I'm really interested in that. And I was in first grade at the time. And so she calls up the publishing house and says, I really like these pictures and these books, and where can I meet people like this? Well, there is no such thing in South Texas. So the closest one, they just started an outreach, these Mennonites in, close to Dallas, is a little town over there. And so we got in touch, or she got in touch with them, and she was hooked from the get go. And I guess I don't know how much to say about my dad and her relationship, but she had divorced her first husband and married my dad, had my brother and I. And the Mennonites don't allow divorce and remarriage. They say it's wrong, bad, you know, uh, every day you're divorced and remarried, you're living in sin, and that's their take on it. And so she stopped being with my dad, but she was still living in the house with him, and she was creating some major problems. So finally they split. That's probably the most scarring time in my life. I didn't know what was going on. You're 5 years old, or actually at that time when she left, I was 6. And I saw her loading up her little car, and I saw them get in the car, and it still, didn't register because I'm this kid. And the next thing I know, they're driving off down the road, honking the horn and waving out the windows. And I remember at that instance, um, I became self-aware. I realized what was happening. I realized that my mom was leaving me and my brother, and I didn't know why. You can't compute that at that age. Um, anyway, so she joins these Mennonites in North Texas. After several years, and I'm skipping over a whole bunch of stuff here, but after several years, she decides they're not conservative enough for her. They were conservative, uh, but they weren't. She wanted something far more austere. So she finds a group in Tennessee that is Amish Mennonite. And part of it was, I believe, she wanted to get us further away from my dad, because at that time she had won custody of us, and she wanted us to have much more distance between my dad and us boys. She saw him as a threat, called him the devil, called him he's demon possessed, whatever else. So every time we'd go with my dad for visitation, she said that we were going under Satan's influence, that we needed to pray to God so he would save us from the devil. I mean, I'm just trying to define. She was really against my dad. And so there's a big thing where when she moved out of state, my dad was able to get custody of us, full custody. And through some underhanded deviousness that she pulled, she was able to regain custody. Took us up to Tennessee. And for instance, when I left my dad, I had white Nike Flights on, almost brand new shoes. And they do not allow white shoes in the Amish Mennonite. So I took a magic marker and I painted those shoes black so I had something to wear. I mean, I just remember, I had to wear something. And so anyway, so these people were so backwards, and they did it intentionally. That was not an accident. They didn't allow any digital anything. So the phones actually had to be the old style where you stuck your finger in and you rotated the old rotary phones, and you dial your number one number at a time. They did not allow push buttons. And I think they gave some reason. First off, it was technology, but second, it would be too easy to call the bad numbers on the push button phones. I don't remember the exact reason, but we were in that, and I was 14 when my mom took us up there, 13 to 14. And I got married in there, had my first son, and then I moved away because of some rather unpalatable happenings.
Yeah. Okay. Your dad was your mom's second husband, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, cool. I guess I'm not familiar with Mennonites, because when I was watching your videos, I was like, Amish Mennonites. I guess they were kind of one and the same. So what is a Mennonite? I think most people would know what the Amish are. They just kind of they kind of reject most modern luxuries of the world. But what's a Mennonite?
So back in the 1500s, I guess, there was a Catholic priest, happened to be, that he left the priesthood, and he shunned that way and started They were called Anabaptist at that time because they didn't believe their infant baptism actually worked, so they would rebaptize adults.
Mm.
And so it was called the Anabaptist movement. His name was Menno Simons. And so the Menno was the Mennonite. So
Okay.
anybody who followed him was called Mennonites.
Okay.
And I guess it was about 150 years ago, a man broke off of the Mennonites that started the Amish. And he believed some things he thought Mennonites were too progressive. And he also did not believe that you could know if you were saved or not. So Mennonites definitely believe that you can know if you're saved. Amish believe that you won't know until you get to the judgment.
Mm.
So, and there's other differences, but Amish do tend to be less progressive. Mennonites do tend to be more progressive.
If I'm understanding it right, do the Amish were a sect of Mennonites from the beginning?
Yes, they
Okay.
actually were Mennonites, and then I think his name was Joseph Ammon or what something like that. And so they, with his last name being Ammon, they
Yeah.
called themselves Amish,
Okay.
the
Okay.
people who followed him away from the Mennonites.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Um. So with that, like, how is this adjusting? You go. You're 14. Is that when you first
Yes.
started? Like when you first kind of joined the religion areas?
Right. Well, actually, I was 13 when we first went to see them,
Yeah.
and it's kind of funny because they didn't have technology. We had to follow them up the little hillside in their black car, and we got there, and we were all sort of sick. We had been to Pennsylvania for a visit, and on our way back, we stopped in, and we were all a little sick, with a little bit of symptoms of being sick, diarrhea, and so we pull up, and there's an outhouse because Mennonites are a big believer in keeping the living real rather than all the comforts. And so we were like, hey, if they don't have indoor plumbing, we're leaving. So
Hmm.
they happened to have one indoor toilet and in the outhouse, but it was a family of 13 that lived there and one indoor toilet.
Hmm.
So, you're sick. You kind of wanting some toilet time there, and that's
Yeah.
not going to satisfy for that many people.
Yeah. 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 How is this adjusting? I mean, you're 13 years old. I'm thinking back to when I was 13. I can't imagine going from, I guess, the normal world and going into a world where, you know, Nintendo is forbidden
Hmm.
and music is forbidden and all, I mean, I guess music isn't, but like CDs, stuff like that, like digital ways of, I mean, do they play music? I'd imagine
No,
they don't even play music at all.
no, nothing
Oh, wow.
digital.
Okay.
No, not even analog, not anything. They
Hmm.
only music that they will do is a cappella, what comes out of your mouth.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Wow. Yeah. So what is it like adjusting to this at 13 years old? Like what's going through your head and what are like the major, like, what are the things that you notice right away? They're like, this is just hard to adapt to.
I think I was in shock. I just
Mm,
so like, but I would equate it to if you, as an American, would be uprooted and placed in another society that spoke another language, and it takes so much to take all that in and try to understand what's happening around you that you really don't have time to. I didn't really have time to pay attention to too much, like other than coloring my Nike shoes with a black magic marker.
yeah.
Um, we had to go get black hats and straw hats and suspenders. We didn't know how to wear them correctly, so that was also in school. I was 14. I was in the 8th grade, and I made some blunders in their private school, which I'm still embarrassed about. But yeah, I didn't have any warning. I didn't know.
Mm,
Um, it it was harsh. I'll just put it. That was really harsh, and I was made fun of. I was a video gamer before I liked computers and video games,
yeah.
and they didn't allow either one. So I was labeled as an outsider that had a taste for worldly technology.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's something you mentioned in your videos that you guys were never really accepted by any of the. You changed. You went to the more conservative place at 16. Um, but they never really accepted you as one of their own. They kind of always treated you guys as lesser than them. Is that right?
Sure, sure. No, and it was especially the bishop. There were some families there that accepted us, maybe suspiciously, but they were kind.
Yeah.
But when you're going from a middle class family and you're pushed into a situation where they don't allow any comforts, and we're talking no carpet, uh, no, I mean, take everything you have around you. Even the lights had to, like, one person described it as dangling out of the ceiling. There could be no light covers on them, just a bulb, because they wanted no fancy things, no pride against God. And it was, you know, you're trying to adjust and you're going to make blunders and you'll be judged for those blunders.
Yeah.
And you're just a kid, an adult somewhere made the decision and you're just trying to fall in line, and yet you're being judged for things you couldn't possibly have known, you know.
Yeah. Have you ever talked to your mom about like looking back? Why'd you go in this direction? Because it seems weird to me, and I would imagine it seems odd to a lot of people that like your mom would see images of, especially in like, you know, people want to be more free, more liberated. It seems odd. It makes sense. Like people go to religion after, going through a wild streak or like going in the wrong direction. People often go through to religion where, you're being covered up completely, like taking everything, like every convenience of modern technology away, like being that restrictive. It's just a very peculiar move. So
I think
yeah,
my mom
yeah,
would recognize that today, and we don't necessarily see eye to eye, my mom and I. I kind of had to limit her access to my family significantly.
mm,
Um, and I'm not, there's people out there that have had some really rough childhoods, and she did. And I'm amazed at the strength she showed at some of the decisions she made. But most of the decisions she made were in her interest and not her boys. But I say with tortured people, and this is maybe gets into philosophy as much as anything, when you have a history of that scars you, and many people do, it's it's the most natural thing in the world to allow that to guide you for future decisions.
mm-hmm,
And that's not right. You shouldn't do that because that limits your options. You kind of get stuck in a feedback loop. And so, yeah, look back at your circumstances, but then look forward to see how far you've come. Look to the future. And I don't believe she ever did that. I think that was what caused her to make some of her crappy decisions.
yeah,
Is she was still stuck, when she was in a foster home. She said she was molested many times. And I know that had to stick with her. And I know that hurt. Even she's 70 now. I know that still hurts her today,
mm-hmm,
but it wouldn't have to. She could move past it if she found the strength to to help the people like my brother and I. If she would have said, you know what, yeah, that was hurtful, yeah, that scarred me, but I'm going to focus on what's important right now, and I'm not going to let that take away from my boys.
yeah.
I believe she could have made better decisions.
I think it's interesting as you grow up. When you're younger, at least most people, like you might have had a different experience because you're going through so much. But a lot of people, they look at their parents as like almost all knowing, like your parents know what's best. They know a lot. And then you get older and you realize, oh, your parents didn't know everything and
Hmm.
they weren't so perfect and they were actually trying to figure everything out too while they were raising you. But then like you get a feel for people, and a lot of people have pain even in their later years that's really caused by when they're younger, like
Yes.
something that they just never healed over, that they never, I don't got closure on, or just never dealt with it properly. And maybe it's not their fault, of course. I'm not, a lot of things just happen to people. Like, obviously somebody getting molested when they're younger, that's not the person it's not, they're a victim in that situation, but
Right.
it's still have to deal with that. You have to figure out a way to deal with that. Otherwise, it's like, it is going to be just lingering there your whole life as this
Right.
painful thing that, you don't never know if something's going to trigger a reaction or how that's in affecting your decision making throughout the rest of your life. So yeah, it's
And
really
it does. Yeah, what you hang on to, it's what you. So I mean, basic steps are, if that scar is significant, then you're going to identify with it. And if you identify with it, it's going to cause you to make different decisions now than you would have if you didn't identify with it.
yeah,
And I'm not. Once again, there's lots of people who suffer horrible and unjust things every day, and I'm not trying to take away from the pain they suffer, but there is an answer. And just say for small things, I tell my son, actually all my kids, something bad happens, you feel like you were unfairly treated or whatever. Sure, feel sorry for yourself a little bit. That's fine. Everybody does it. I feel sorry for myself sometimes. And then when you get finished, get over it and go on to something better and forget it. Because if you sit there and roll around in it, there's no future.
yeah. I mean, it's something that's really interesting to. We're going to get more into your story, but you have a lot of things that happened that you have caused to have resentment over. Like a lot of people who have gone through what you did, you have, it would be completely justified for you to have resentment over and negative feelings toward a lot of the people you're around, but you don't. You don't. You think you actually have a lot of positive things to say. I mean, um, you still have positive things to say about some of the things you learned by being a part of these groups. And I like that. I like that mindset of not holding on to the negative feelings. So I really
Right.
respect that.
Well, thank you. But um, I was bitter. I can't describe to you how bitter and angry I was for many years after I left. I was so angry that, and I didn't even, like, I never took time to understand how angry I actually was, but I would snap at the smallest thing and grit my teeth and break something because I was so angry. It's so unfair.
Yeah,
And, and then one day, um, I say one day, it was like I had a revelation one day, and I realized I was going nowhere fast, and I wasn't helping myself, and I wasn't for sure wasn't helping anybody else.
yeah,
And that's no way to live. I was throwing away every day that happened. I'd wake up that morning and throw the whole day away.
hmm,
Wake up the next morning, throw the whole day away. And I had the option to redeem the day for me or for others or for both.
yeah, yeah. That's. I mean, it's just another aspect of holding on to negative feelings from the past. Is like it's going to affect right now. It's going to affect what's going on, and we tend to, if we're holding on to anger for something that we can't do anything about, we tend to take the anger out on people or things that had nothing to do with the cause of the anger, and they're just there. It's just this is the present situation. So I want to dive into the moving to a more conservative, like, so your mom goes to this Mennonite group. You're there for 2 to 2.5 years. That's not conservative enough. Like she needs more conservative.
Well, actually, it was 8 years.
Mm,
And so my mom is a very strong natured woman. And I always admired that about her. But that inevitably means that she's going to clash with male leaders who she feels have not made the right decision or whatever. And so she's not the person to sit on her hands. She'll go right to them and tell them to their face and made a wrong decision. Well, if these Mennonites in North Texas, they would take that, but it didn't make great relations. But the ones in Tennessee, they would not take that. The women, In fact, in preparation for this, I found the standard book, and when I say standard, is their rule book
Hmm.
for the church that she joined,
Hmm.
that I eventually joined, and I was reading in it before this, and it says, it has the rules for the women, and it says, oh man, it's I don't even know where to start, but sisters shall wear constantly a headship covering large enough and opaque enough to cover the head, and of such form as the church designates, with strings attached and tied. Sisters shall wear cape dress, designated, and it goes on and on. And it talks in there also about how women are not permitted to talk out in the church service. Women are not permitted to teach a man. Women are not permitted. I mean, uh, very. And so my mom and the whole reason I'm saying that is because my mom was very strong natured, and she ran into a lot of situations where her tongue got her into trouble. She'd open her mouth and offend one of the ministers or whatever, the bishop. So, but that's the main reason that she left the North Texas group, is she felt like the men weren't making good decisions for the group.
Gotcha. North Texas group. She was there for 8 years, but you were only there for two and a half, right? Is that
Right. For just a
okay?
few years,
Right.
I went
Okay.
back and forth with my dad.
Gotcha. So then you guys go to this one at the age of 16. You go to this
Uh,
Tennessee one.
14.
Oh, at the age of 14, you go
Yes,
to
sir.
this more conservative one in Tennessee. And they're, what are the ways that they're more conservative? Like, where does it actually, like, where do you actually see the difference?
Well, I mean, we know what, or do you know what like an Amish person looks like?
I mean, I don't think I've ever interacted with an Amish person, but like I've seen people in New York riding on horse and buggy. Yeah.
Sure, sure. So they tend to have a very plain, like dark color
Yeah.
pants and shirt, like the men, with suspenders, with big beards, with a hat that is definitely not in style. It's
Yeah.
either a straw hat or a black hat, and they all have religious significance to that. And the Mennonites see in North Texas they were always crisp, and it's kind of reminded me of how the armed forces always have like crisp look to about them. That's sort of how the Mennonites in North Texas, they always tried to be presentable. They cared about their appearance. They allowed freedom among their members uh, to have self-expression, maybe. Whereas there in the Amish Mennonite community, self-expression was forbidden.
Hmm.
So, but the appearance was very rough. The men were like very rough. We almost always got clothes from, what was the name of that uh, clothing? Not I can only think of Adidas, but it's not. Um, they provide clothes for factory workers. Like,
Dickies?
well, it was them too, but there's a special one that they pick up the laundry, they do it, they bring it's uniforms,
Mm.
and
Yeah,
so
I forget the name, but yeah, I know what you're talking
we
about.
would, after those were worn out from the factory, we would buy them, and we would wear those until they had holes in them,
Yeah.
and the Mennonites would take the collars off, so it was just a straight, like almost like a priest would have, no collar, just a straight button. Um, you couldn't have long hair, you couldn't have short hair. When you got old enough, you had to have a full beard and mustache, and I mean, we're talking full beard. So as soon
Yeah.
as you could grow one, you were required to grow one.
Yeah, in one of your videos you talk about how it was almost like a competition. Like if you can grow a longer beard, you're almost seen as more holy. I'd be
Yes.
screwed. I can't grow a beard for the life of me.
Yeah. Well, there was a couple guys there that had straggly chin hair, and
Yeah, that'd
they
be
were made fun of.
yeah, yeah. I'd be made fun
Uh,
of for sure.
but like you talk about the difference, even at like church, over the pulpit, the bishop, ministers, they all pretty much in agreement. They would talk about things like even like perfume, cologne, and the bishop. many times made the observation that a little body odor was actually a good odor because it showed that person was honest. And he would much prefer that to, the stick deodorant was not acceptable. And even the detergent you put in your laundry had to be like unscented because they don't want to have that worldly odor about them. And it made for some uncomfortable 2 hour and 2.5 hour services where the person next to you needed a bath, type of thing.
Yeah. Well, I've been in situations where I've been around people with body odor, but it's like fairly limited. I haven't had to be around it for like extended periods of time. Your stories of being in the back of the church. Was this before you got married, right? You'd be sitting in the back, or was it
That
after?
was right after I got married.
Right after. Okay, you'd be sitting in the back, and you're talking about like these a dairy farmer sitting next to you, and uh, there was no there wasn't good circulation of air in there.
Right.
So you're just sitting in there bathing in it.
Yeah. Yeah. So these dairy farmers were some of the most conservative. They actually would freely admit they only took a shower or bath once a week, literally. And
Yeah.
they owned a dairy, ran one. And they would come to church, and you could smell the dairy on them, but you could also smell body odor. And so, I try to keep a little room, but then this visitor would come in just occasionally, same guy, and he'd want to sit on the back bench, and the benches were small, so I'd have to scoot towards the dairy farmers. And, you sort of keep your head down because odor rises, kind of.
Yeah.
And so this guy, that the visitor, he's a nice guy, but he'd eat garlic in the morning, and he had indigestion, really significant indigestion, and he he would belch. I don't think he meant to, but it was horrible.
Yeah.
It was like, you needed to get the cleanup crew in there, and so I'd just jerk over to the other side, sort of just involuntarily, try to reroute my smelling instrument, and catch a full whiff of cow manure and body odor, and it was just it's like dry. You're just like, what?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Oh, that sounds horrible. So, how old were you when you got married?
I was 22.
And there's a story, uh, the bishop, when you first told him that you wanted to pursue that, because you had to like get everything, basically, if you wanted to pursue a girl in
Right.
the, uh, what would you call it? In the organization?
in
Um,
the in the
in
church
the
is what
church,
they
in the
say.
church. Uh, if you wanted to pursue somebody, you kind of had like to get the okay from the bishop, and you asked the bishop for the okay, and he laughed at you.
Yeah, he was hostile to me to the day I left.
Yeah.
And I'm, like I told you before, I'm an introvert, so it was really tough for me to go to somebody like the bishop and say, hey. And first off, I didn't even believe my potential special friend is what they call him. They wouldn't say girlfriend; that was worldly, so he's special friend.
Mm.
My potential special friend, I figured I'd get shot down instantly and never have the chance to court. So with that in mind, I had to go and ask the bishop first. And then I thought, well, I'm probably going to get shot down anyway. Why am I even asking the bishop? And I'm like, well, I would like to ask your permission to court Marianne. And he goes, ha ha ha, it's like, what in the world is that? Like you
Yeah.
wonder. He never defined it, but later I found out, and he gave me permission. After I started courting Marianne, I found out that his son had asked Marianne only about a month prior, and she had told him to wait.
Mm.
And so, in the bishop's mind, his son was going to just wait a few months, and then I was going to get shot down. His son was going to get the candy, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and so that's why he laughed. And like, I don't know how to feel about that still to this day. Like, I don't know if he got karma or I don't know. I was like,
Did you ever have any interactions where you can? I mean, like after it was obvious that your now wife was interested in you, were there any exchanges between you and the bishop where you could see maybe like resentment in him or like a little bit of like, I mean, obviously it didn't play out the way that he thinks it would.
yes,
Yeah.
actually, yes. But also with his son was significant. His son was staying at a place with my brother, and it was right after I started I say dating, courting Marianne, and his son's name was Marvin Jeremy. And Marvin Jeremy says, I don't understand how Marianne could refuse me or reject me and accept Curtis. I just don't understand. That does not make sense.
Mm.
I was like, I know I'm not, like, I know I wasn't a status symbol. I mean, I've always known that. But for somebody to vocalize that was, but then the bishop also is right after that we were going to leave, and he tried to force me to stay. He told me that he was not going to give me a clear release.
Mm.
And in the Mennonite Amish communities, what that means is, say you already are in that church and you say, well, I see this other church I'd like to move to, either because you're getting married there or you have family there, or just maybe you want to go there. So you have to ask the church you're at and say, hey, this is a church I'd like to go to. And so they think about it, and then they say yes or no. And if they say yes, they'll write a letter to the other church and they'll send it off saying, Artie was a great guy. He served the Lord faithfully. Or maybe they would say, Artie tries hard, but sometimes he falls into sin. They'll write whatever they want to in there.
Yeah.
Well, when I asked to move to North Texas, because if you don't get a clear release, the other church won't accept you. He said, I will not allow you to be released because you have shown a constant disregard for our standards.
Yeah.
Well, that was just him getting even.
Mm.
And so, yes, in answer to your question, yes.
Yeah. When you said the story, it sounded like when you were saying what the bishop's son said, you said the name Curtis. Is your middle name Curtis, or is that what
Yes.
you went by? Or okay.
Yeah, all my friends called me Curtis is my middle name.
All right, cool. Backing up a little bit, you talk about this kissing ritual that they have. Well, when I listened to that video or watched the video, I was like, oh, that sounds horrible. Like, you're not kissing on the cheek. Go ahead and talk about this a little bit.
Once again, I'll preface by saying that I'm a germaphobe.
Yeah.
I've mellowed in my older age, but at that time, but no, they would. In the Bible, there is one verse and one verse only that says to greet all the brethren with an holy kiss.
Yeah.
And they take that very literally. And so some of the newer versions, that's a King James. Some of the newer versions say with a hearty handshake or, whatever. But I guess you've seen the Arabian culture tends to greet on the cheek, maybe two sides.
Yeah.
I assume that's what the Bible was talking about, but they took it on the lips, baby. I mean, you get right up in there and you do your business. And so you would reach for the hand like a normal handshake, then you'd pull together and you would just right on the lips. And there were some, especially the younger men, tried to sort of turn their cheek a little bit, and they would get called out for it, say, nope, that's not allowed. You got to kiss right on the lips.
Mm.
And that would all be within the realms of possibility for a germaphobe until people don't take care of their facial regions.
Mm.
Either there's drool or they lick their lips, or there's food caught in the beard, or and it's only men to men and women to women. They don't greet women to men at all.
Yeah, was it the guy, the pudding guy, that licked his lips every time right before?
Yes. He had Parkinson's, and when he wasn't on his medication, it looked like baby food. I said pudding, but it actually looked just like baby food, just right here in this hair on. And he would leave it on your face after he got finished greeting, and it was nasty. Just not trying to be mean.
Yeah, I mean, that alone would be, I'd run away. Honestly, I would have trouble with that.
Yeah.
You said, I don't know if it was a visitor or what. You said somebody came and didn't know the ritual and started naming the women.
So like they're seated segregated, men on one side, women on the other of the church.
Yeah.
And he looks up, he's just like 15-year-old, and I was much younger than him at the time. And he looks up and sees the men kissing each other, and so he's like, I guess, light bulb moment, and he goes over there to the women's side and he starts trying to shake their hand. Well, they're going to shake hands, but they're not going to greet you. But he starts pulling them in. He's reeling them in for a kiss, and it made a it made waves. I'll put it that way.
Was he an outsider, or like he was just young?
Yes,
Outsider.
yes, it was an outsider.
Okay, okay. What was he like? Under what circumstances do outsiders come and go to church in the church?
So the Mennonites, especially, not the Amish. The Amish are very closed usually, but the Mennonites are very evangelical. Like they want to reach out, they want
Yeah,
to pull people into the good news of Christ, and so they'll go and they'll make friendships. Say they're doing a building for somebody or putting in hay or whatever, and they'll invite them to church. Hey, come over to church with us.
yeah.
And when those people come to church, actually, there's some really good instances where people, you walk in, you're not used to segregated seating to begin with, and the couple would sit on one side or the other, and there would literally be people come back saying, no, you can't do that. The man has to sit over here, or the woman has to go
Mm,
over there, and it's
yeah,
just like, but they're very oriented towards helping people or inviting them to church.
yeah. So there was a scandal, or a few scandals. There were several scandals in
Several,
the church. This was in the more conservative one, the Tennessee one. Is that correct?
yes.
Okay.
And
So
I want to make it clear
yeah,
that the reason I called the one that we were at in Tennessee a cult um, is because they had ultimate control over the individual. So you had no autonomy. You had to conform in every way to them, and you couldn't get out without. Well, you couldn't get out. So if you left, you were ostracized, and they used religion to control people. That has all the makings of a cult. The group in North Texas, I don't consider a cult.
um, was was there a? We'll get into the scandals in a minute. You had a family, or a family that you guys. So you guys were kind of rejected by a lot of the church community, but there was a family, the Culp family, who were you said like the rednecks of the group, but then they were accepting to you guys.
Oh man, the Culps, they were a great bunch.
Yeah.
Even to this day, I've kept up. In fact, one of the Culps married my sister.
Okay.
But
That's the love at first sight one that you mentioned in your video.
yes,
Okay. Yeah.
um, and I think I liked them so much and resonated with them because they were just who they were. They weren't putting on airs. It was no Hollywood production. They were they were being honest with who they were. And so you see that in somebody, and you say, "Well, I like that person." And they did, they were the people that we would put in. Hey, I don't think I told this story on the YouTube channel, but so we were putting in hay, and we did a lot of that. And there's one field that had about 3,000 square bales that needed to be put in. Well, you can't do that in one day's time, not by hand. And so we went out there and we put in hay all day long. Well, I mean, you have to wait to start baling until about 11 o'clock in the morning, so the dew comes off the grass. So about 12 o'clock, we're out there starting to throw bales, and we throw bales until after dark. And it's a hot day. We sweat. Have you ever seen sweat marks that leave white stains behind, like salt mineral stains on the
Yeah.
shirt?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like rings. It looked like an oak tree with rings. So we get to the Colt's house, which was very close to where we were putting in hay. And we say, hey, we'll just sleep over here tonight, and we'll head back out in the mornings. Okay, so says something about showers. Oh no, that Daddy doesn't turn on the hot water until Saturday, so we can take showers for church. So if you want to take a shower, go for it. It's cold water. Oh no, it doesn't sound good to me.
Yeah.
So we was like, okay, and you chaff all over you. You're prickly. It feels like you rolled into cactus.
Yeah.
And so the next morning we had brought some spare clothes with us, and Thomas and my brother and I, we get into our spare clothes, and the Colt boys had draped their old clothes over the chair and put them right back on, went right back out to it. And that's how real they were. They were not putting on airs for anybody.
Yeah.
And it's as primitive as that may be, there's something that appeals about somebody who is that transparently honest.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And what did that friendship do for you? I mean, obviously having a friend when a lot of people are rejecting you is valuable in itself. Like having somebody who are, you feel some companionship with when you don't feel with many people is important. But What did that friendship kind of teach you?
Well, I mean, I remember I just wanted to be like the Colts. I didn't care if nobody else accepted me or not. These people liked me for who I was, and I would have I would have sacrificed myself to be their friends,
Yeah.
to be friends with them. I, you know, and they each of the boys had very different personalities. Still to this day, the oldest one, Manasseh, I talk about him in my videos, and there's a story I didn't tell on my YouTube videos that it might be a little, uh, not risque would be the right word. It might be a little suggestive, but if you want to hear it, it's actually a really funny story.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So these people are primitive, and I say that multiple times because I don't know how else to say it. But a good illustration is when he first came to see my sister officially for the courting her. And they had just recently purchased a ton truck, a Chevy ton truck. And well, once again, you couldn't buy new vehicles and you had to paint them black. So when they bought this truck, they went to the junkyard and bought an old Orange County truck out of the junkyard and fixed it up. They painted it with paintbrushes, and even the windows had some paint splatter on them from the paintbrushes. And that's what he drove up in to court my sister. So we hear this. Oh, it didn't have an exhaust, so it's like rah, 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 drives up in the driveway, and we look out. And on Sunday, you weren't allowed to do anything. You had to sit quietly. You couldn't do anything. So my brother and I were bored out of our minds. We're sitting there waiting for time to go to church, and we're just sort of twiddling our thumbs. And we hear Manasseh drive in, and his name was literally Manasseh. And he drives in, rah, 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 Tammy, your boyfriend's here. And so she comes running to the door. We hear a knock on the door, and he's a big, burly guy, very hairy as well.
Yeah.
And you might have to cut this part out. I don't know. But anyway, he knocks on the door, and, we can't, there's nothing else going on. So we just kind of watching this. It's his first time to be there officially. And she reaches out the door, and we can see her shaking his hand, and he starts coming in, but we didn't see him at first. And I kid you not, we wore really baggy clothing.
Yeah.
He says, I was sort of casually looking over, and then I looked over again, and he had come in, but he had this huge tent in his pants. And I mean, it was ridiculous. I would try to, I'd sound like Theo Vaughn if I tried to, and I'd never seen anything quite like that before. And I look over at my brother, and we look at each other, and we look at each other, we're like, whoa, just sort of, this is awkward. So we're sort of turning to the side, and she says, how are you doing? And he looks at her monotone. He goes, I need to use your bathroom. And she goes, okay, it's over there. So he goes in there, and Thomas and I are like, we bet he needs to use the bathroom, He comes out, and it's all normal. And so later when he left, we told Tammy, he was like, hey, Tammy, how about your, and, we demonstrated for her, pranced around the house demonstrating. And she goes, oh, he just needed to urinate. And I was like, yeah, I bet he did. So anyway, he was so primitive. He didn't even know that was something to be ashamed of.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's some honesty. There's honesty about that,
Yeah. Well, this is like what, around the age of 16 for you, somewhere around there?
I was probably 17 by that point.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, growing up public schools, you're a kid, you can't control that happening at all times. And as a male growing up, going through puberty, that's a very uncomfortable time. You get it in class or something like that. You don't want to stand up. So to be completely unaware of that is remarkable.
It was remarkable. So, but no, these boys, one of them flipped a tractor upside down on top of himself, found out afterwards he had a blood condition that caused instant clotting, that uncontrollable clotting. So he ended up in Vanderbilt for 3 weeks while they fed him medication to reduce the clotting. But they should, by rights, the stunts that they pulled, they probably should have perished, in their childhood.
Yeah.
And they would do it with grins, not even realizing that it was dangerous.
Yeah. And this whole time, one thing that I don't think listeners would have gathered from this, you guys were hurting. Like you were not in a good financial position as is your immediate family. You guys were not well off. You had to
No.
ask for help and stuff like that. And this is in Tennessee, I believe. The bishop was very not accommodating. One of the stories you had was he said he saw food in your freezer,
Right.
and if eat that food before you ask for any help or something like that.
Right.
It was
Right.
jelly.
It was, yes, it was actually before you make jelly, you boil the fruit down, you like get the pulp and all. It
Yeah,
was that my sister had frozen.
yeah,
So it wasn't even jelly yet. It was in preparation for jelly.
yeah,
And yeah, he told us to, he said, my mom said, hey, we're hungry. We didn't have 3 meals a day, there wasn't food. So
yeah,
she's like, hey, we kind of could use some assistance with food. And, he says, and the bishop had the right to come into your home at any time and look in any room and any drawer of any dresser and censor anything he saw. So I guess he had looked in our freezer and he saw these flat Ziploc packets of what appeared to be food. He says, well, I was in your freezer. He said, I saw you had some frozen food in there. So you go ahead and eat that up. And
mm,
then once you get finished with that, we can talk about some food.
yeah.
So
When an
yeah,
exchange like that happens, though, I mean, is there any retort? Is there any way to be like, well, no, that's not food. I mean, it's food, but it's not food that can sustain you. Like, is there any conversation like that, or is it just the bishop
no,
says something and that's what it is?
no, he represents God.
Mm,
If you have a good bishop, that can be fine. But if you have one that either has a chip on his shoulder or just straight up dislikes you, I mean, what he says goes.
yeah,
And he can go, he actually would have what they call brethrens meetings where he'd gather all the brethren together. He could call them on the spur of a moment and he would lay the law down. So when I guess it was a few months after he moved there, he called a brethrens meeting and says, these two teenage boys are contamination. They're from the world and they're going to contaminate our youth. So I expect that you don't allow your children to be around them at all.
yeah,
So for over a year, we had no social, none,
yeah,
my brother and I.
yeah. At one point, you're given some land by somebody, and you start farming. Is this after or before you were married?
This is all before
Okay,
this,
okay.
this bishop stuff.
And I didn't know anything. You said you were farming okra, right?
Oh my goodness. That was,
I had
yeah,
no idea, like what you were telling about, like the little needles or the spines or whatever.
right.
Uh, I didn't know. I didn't know anything about okra farming.
Did you
So
look it up?
no, no, just from what you said, just like it.
Yeah. So if you're just picking a short row, 10 feet long, it's a little, it feels like putting your hand in insulation, the
Yeah,
fiberglass
yeah,
insulation. But it was a half of an acre of okra that I was picking.
yeah,
That's 100 feet by 200 feet, just roughly stated.
yeah,
Rows that you could barely, you could just turn and walk naturally between them, and there was plants touching your shoulders.
yeah,
That is a lot of okra, and so it made a good amount of money. It was a great crop for money, but my goodness, the skin would actually come off and I'd bleed because it was too much. After a while, the splines would actually take off the skin.
Wait, I mean, could you wear gloves though?
You could, but then to so if you're going to sell okra, you have to pick it carefully.
Yeah,
It can't be bruised or any of that. So when you wear a glove, you sort of snap it with your fingers at the stem, and you can feel that with your bare hand. But if you try to wear gloves, you might not get it right, and then
mm,
you try to sell it in town, and people are like, "Well, I don't like that stuff."
yeah, yeah. Okay. Oh, how long did you farm that for?
Well, that was just one season.
Okay,
I'd say it lasted about 3 months, maybe.
gotcha. Okay. Um,
But the good news is, out of that, that was the only money I was allowed to keep. That was when I was about 16. And out of that, I was able to buy my first welder and a little building to put it in, like a little mini barn looking thing.
yeah,
Actually, I built the mini barn, but I
yeah.
bought the materials.
The reason I keep putting up the scandals is because if I'm not mistaken, the scandals are at least one of them specifically is tied to you leaving the church, if I understand right. So I want to leave that to, dive into that fully. So I want to hear the Walkman story because it was just hilarious.
So I hadn't listened to that one, so I don't remember what all I said. So, however, I'll just tell it from memory.
Yeah.
Um, I had been down to my dad's house in South Texas, and it's a long story about why we went there, but we weren't allowed to go without supervision. And actually, Manasseh went along as a supervisor, which is hilarious. Not much of a supervisor, but anyway, it made me mad. Like, I mean, I guess I was 18 years old at the time. I think that's right, 18 or 19. And I'd already, like, when you have the bishop breathing down your neck and you have unfair things happening to you. So I was becoming disillusioned a little bit. And I'm visiting my dad, and he's like, hey, I know you like music before you left the house. And they had just come out with the Walkman, which was like the portable CD player.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, that's awesome. He's like, you want it? And I was like, I don't mind if I do, for the most part, I tried to do what was expected of me, but like I said, I was a little upset with things. So I took it, and it had a Phil Collins, it was the album, But Seriously by Phil Collins, and it was Survivor, Their Greatest Hits. And it also had the capabilities of listening to the radio channels, so.
Yeah.
I get it back, and I'm listening to it the whole way home. Nobody can see me, and I'm listening to it. And we get back to to where we live there in Tennessee, and I hide it in the place where I weld. Well, yeah, it's safe there. Wouldn't you know it? My brother walks in on me one day as I'm listening to it. It was just like a week and a half after I got the thing. And he walks in, and I have the earphones on, and he says, "What you doing?" I was like, "You can see you idiot. You can see what I'm doing." He goes, "When'd you get it?" I was like, "Oh, when we were down there, and he's like, "I want to turn." It's kind of mine. He goes, "I'll tell Mom," Yeah. I said, okay. Well, how about 50-50? Already negotiating, because I realized in my mind I could already see what was going to happen here. So, okay. Would you know that guy took up 60-70% of the uses? I mean, I think he did it sometimes just to irritate me. But
yeah, this is older or younger?
Your brother? Younger brother.
Younger. Okay. How much younger?
13 months.
Okay.
And so, he's a really good guy. He can tell some stories way better than I can. Sometime I need to get you to meet him. But anyway, he got mad at me. So it was about 3 or 4 weeks after all that. He got mad at me for something. I don't even remember what it was. Anyway, he had one piece of blackmail on me, and that was a CD player. So, I mean, obviously, what's he going to use? CD player.
Yeah.
And so my mom comes to me, and I'd hidden it from my mom. She didn't know about it. She goes, "Curtis, I don't know what you have, and I don't want to know at this point, but I would suggest you get rid of it as quick as you can." So, "What are you talking about?" And she goes, "Your brother's upset with you." And I said, the light bulb moment. Oh yeah, okay. So that second I went down and got it, and I mailed it back to my dad. And I put in a stern letter about how it was worldly music and all that, just to be extra safe,
Yeah.
So fast forward about 3 days, we get to work, and one of the men that actually acted as a father figure to me, he said, "Well, I'm going to go to Nashville." He said, I want to pick up some toolboxes from my truck. He says, "Curtis, I want you to go with me." I said, "Oh, no." The feeling when you can see, like, it's obvious what's fixing to happen.
Yeah.
But, I'm not capable of saying no. So I ride with him, and I got chewed out on a loop for 3 hours straight. He would start at the beginning, go through the whole thing, and end with saying how disappointed he was. And then he'd start back at the beginning, go through the whole thing again. Well, and I don't know if I included this in the story on YouTube, but I was getting dressed down in the middle of Nashville, and he was so busy talking. He's driving, and he was so busy talking to me and chewing me out that he went through a red light and got stuck in the middle of the intersection and got pulled over and ticketed for it. And in my mind, I was saying, yes, but I'm just a kid. I don't want
Yeah,
to
yeah,
act up. Anyway, so he ends with, and as we're almost getting home, and I was like, in my mind, I was like, he doesn't realize that Thomas was part and party to this.
yeah,
Thomas enjoyed it just as much as I did. The only reason he has a high ground is because he's the one that told first.
yeah, yeah.
And so I started to say that, and he goes, I don't want to hear about it. Thomas already said you try to implicate him, and he was a victim in this case, and you should be ashamed of yourself. So he said, what I want you to do, he said, I know you said you mailed it back, but I want you to go to the bishop and confess to him.
Mm.
Oh my goodness, the bishop hates me. So I went to the bishop, I did, and I said, this is what happened, and I mailed it back, and I put a letter of reproof to my dad. Like I juiced it up as much as I could rightfully do so, and strangely enough, he did not choose to take me out of membership. So just saying.
the the foresight of your brother to not only tell on you, but also tell the person that he told that he's going to try to blame it on me. He's going to try to turn it around and blame it on me, but I'm innocent.
Yeah.
To just kind of get that out there.
My brother is, so like I have knowledge, like as far as my IQ goes, I'm like really knowledgeable.
Yeah.
But I have very little social intelligence. But my brother got all the social intelligence. And I mean, he can read people in an instant. He knows exactly what to say, and he knows how to tell a great story. So he used that against me. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I want to, so you're autistic and you talk about this. We've talked about it before. I want to ask you something about autism and growing up in this environment, because I interviewed Dr. Christina Sty. I believe you met her in that space that we had with that. And she grew up in a cult, essentially. And she said that the atmosphere, the rigid atmosphere, actually worked really well for her autism, because it's like it was just clear. Even though it might have been oppressive, but the rules were very clear. Like what was right and what was wrong was very easy to define. And that was actually like, she actually kind of, I don't want to say thrived. I don't want to like use the wrong word, but it actually worked well for her. Like the structure was good for her in a certain sense. Did you feel that at all?
Yes. The first 7 or 8 months, I felt like I was constantly trying to figure things out. Like it was confusing, but after I kind of got into the swing of things, I actually believe that allowed me to operate better than my brother. So if you compare side by side now, he's successful. I cannot say anything about his success. I mean, he's doing well.
Yeah.
But and I'm sorry if Thomas hears this and feels like I'm saying something against him. I'm not, but he definitely has a problem with women in general. And I think it's because of what my sister and my mother and different individuals forced on him that he never got over. Whereas I was able to, after I got over my anger, I was able to go, I actually made myself appointments at a counselor, and I spent several sessions seeing a counselor. And I was able to overcome that. And I think that's in part because of the structure naturally fed my autism fed into that, sort of like you were saying with a good doctor. It's familiar, it's repeat, you know what to expect. There's no curveballs. I mean, other than the CD player, that's a pretty big curveball, but I mean, but I'm just saying you kind of know what to expect, and that's kind of familiar and comforting.
Yeah. So do you feel like you've established at a certain point, you establish like what's right and what's wrong? So you have your moral landscape basically somewhat, at least pretty clear for you at this point, right? Is that why once you started hearing about these scandals that they like it was just like a deal breaker for you, like because that's what ultimately killed it for you is um why don't we get into the scandals first? There was the one guy was banned for reporting abuse, and then there was the 12-year-old girl. So I'd love it for you to give a little background into those.
Right. Actually, and so they kind of go hand in hand. And there's a huge story around this. Like, I don't know if, like, you'd miss details if you just tried to talk about it, right?
Yeah,
But, but I made some mistakes, like the CD player, and there were some other things that because I was angry and felt unjustly picked on in many ways, I I didn't do what I knew was right, shall we say it that way. But for the most part, all I wanted to do was please God and please those around me. I wanted to be a saint. I wanted to do what I knew was right so that someday I could die and go to heaven, right? And so I wasn't playing games. To me, this was serious. If I dressed with suspenders and grew a beard, it was because I thought, well, this is what the bishop tells me is right, so I'll do my best at it.
yeah,
And and then all of a sudden, and the first one that popped up was in a neighboring church. It was not very far away. We shared church services with them sometimes. They they there was rumors started circulating that one of the girls, 12-year-old girls, I think she had just turned 13 actually, was pregnant, and she was showing. So I mean, it was pretty obvious that something had happened there.
yeah,
It wasn't the virgin birth or anything. So there was sin, right? I mean, I'm talking from the church's perspective. And so they were going to uh, take her to task for this, and it became apparent that it was her brother, her 19-year-old brother, that had impregnated her. And and at first, when something like this happens, it doesn't matter if it's happening in America or another country. You only get bits and pieces to begin with, and then slowly the details fill themselves in. Well,
yeah,
when all the details had settled, the girl got treated. They called any woman that was immoral a harlot. The harlot like Jezebel. And so they sort of had that view of this 13-year-old girl, and the boy kind of got off with just a little on the back of the hand because, well, he really didn't know what was going on. And I said, what do you mean he didn't know what was going on? He goes, well, he didn't know what he was doing. He didn't realize what that action would lead to. And he only did it twice. Okay, so I'm from out there. I'm from the world, shall we say. I know better than that. I'm not an idiot. I know that boys going through puberty are very seldom ignorant. And I know that the sister is probably a victim. I mean, this is pretty clear.
yeah,
If anybody opens their eyes, it's pretty clear the sister was probably, what, you think a 12-year-old girl is going to go flirt with her brother? I don't think so. That's not natural. And so I was super confused about this, and they ostracized the 12-year-old or now 13-year-old girl, and they gave a little slap to the boy, and they said, well, we'll allow him back into fellowship because he's not a bad guy. And the baby was born, and they had the doctor who sort of took care of the Mennonites write it up as if the 13-year-old girl's parents were the actual biological parents. So like he forged paperwork saying that that child's parents were the grandparents in actuality. And he got his license taken, by the way, for actions like that. And so I asked the question. I said, how can we tell a doctor to lie? And they were like, well, we got to avoid the appearance of evil. Evil happened here. You want to all of a sudden avoid the appearance of it, even though it happened. That's not right. And so I'm reeling from this, and I'm thinking, well, what do I do? It feels like nobody's really serious about this. Like, okay, say this happens. We live in a world where things like this do happen. and say they took care of it the right way. They did not ostracize the young lady. They gave her the support she needed, and they made it clear that the boy was in the wrong because he was, and they didn't get the doctor to forge paperwork. Well, it still would have been a scandal, but at least it would have been dealt with properly.
Yeah.
And right before I could rectify that in my mind, a young man came forward. He was now like 26 or 27 years old, and he stood up in church and he said, I've got to get something off my chest. He said, I was in the 7th or 8th grade, and he said, multiple times a teacher, who was now a minister, would, as he was taking me home from school, and he graphically told what happened, and it was molestation by the teacher on this, I guess he was 15 years old.
Yeah.
And after he confessed that, he said, I have to get off my chest. He said, it's hanging over me and I can't get past this, and I want to get past this. And they ostracized him. They excommunicated and ostracized him. But the minister just got off once again with just a little token acknowledgement, And that was the last straw. And I said, that's it. I cannot be part of a group who is playing games. It's like our politics today in the government. It's just playing games, I'm here because I want to go to heaven. I'm here because I want to love God, and the rest of you don't seem to care. And I say that broadly. There were people who actually did care a lot.
Yeah.
But you don't stand against the ministry, Yeah.
So, and the decision of like being excommunicated or continuing your membership came down to like accepting communion. Like,
right. That's a good point. So this happened like 2 months or 1 month before communion, which is super serious to these Mennonites, and most Mennonites in general take it very seriously. And I told the minister at that time, I said, and had just gotten married, and he was my brother-in-law, the minister. The bishop was not, but the minister was. And I said, his name was Sam, and I said, Sam, I don't think I can take communion because this is on my heart. And how am I supposed to express that I have peace with God and peace with the church when I really don't? If you're not playing games, this is serious stuff. And he goes, well, I don't know about that, but he says, it's going to be a test of membership. I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, anybody who refuses to take part in communion is going to get excommunicated. And when you get excommunicated, and he didn't add this, I know this. When you get excommunicated, you're not allowed to eat with your family. You're not allowed to talk to your family. You are an outcast. So it's a separation.
How quick is that separation? Like you reject communion and it's instant.
Instant.
Like I want to dive into that a little bit. When you say instant, it's like you're rushed out and they talk with your family immediately and say don't talk to them anymore. Okay.
Yes. And the only way you get back in is if you make a public apology in church. You stand up in the middle of church and say, I want to confess my sins. This is my sin. I would like to be back into fellowship with the church. Yeah. And then they'll discuss it as a church, whether they should let you back in or not.
Okay.
So anyway, so this is pretty serious business. And they say it's going to be a test of membership. So I told my brother-in-law, I says, how do you expect me to take part in something so serious when there's such a burden on my mind about this nonsense? He says, well, I don't know. And I says, Sam, the only way I can do it, I said, you're a minister. I said, if I'm sinning by taking communion, can you take that upon yourself so that I don't bear that sin? Because you're telling me I need to. And he goes, are you trying to put your sin on me? I says, no. The whole thing is just mind-blowing. I said, no, I'm not. I said, take it as a compliment. I'm saying I trust you enough to say that I believe you'll do what's right. He goes, I'm not worthy. Oh my goodness. So before each communion, you have to go to the ministry personally, individually, and say, hey, I feel like I'm right with God. I feel like I'm right with the church. I love all the brethren, So when I went down and I said, hey, I've talked to Sam and he already has my confession. and on that premise, I'll take communion. And the bishop was super confused. I could see the look on his face like he didn't know what was happening. But they let it slide, and I was able to take communion.
Hmm. Okay,
No,
so you didn't get excommunicated at that time.
not at
You
that
you
point.
left. You left. You weren't kicked out.
Right, correct.
Okay. This okay is the was the church generally kind of like misogynistic, like men, like all things being equal. Let's say there's a dispute between a man and a woman. Are they going to take the man's side generally?
Almost always.
Okay. Okay. Because it seems, I mean, 12 or 13-year-old girl, I think a 12 or 13-year-old girl could potentially be interested in sex, probably if there was abuse earlier, or if there was like early, stuff damage, typically. Like, I
Right.
think younger women can be, you know, i- tilted in that direction if there's abuse, typically.
Sure.
But it seems wild to think that a 19-year-old boy would, or a man, his he would just have no consequences knocking up a 12-year-old girl, his sister, um, which is horrible in itself.
Right.
Even if they're similar age, it'd be horrible. But I mean, it's hard to imagine any situation where the girl was more knowledgeable than the guy with that age difference.
No. No, and I'll just point out here is as a man and you go to a public park and there's some improper suggestion by a kid. Say you're with your kids or with somebody, your brother's kids or whatever, taking them to the park, and there's somebody comes up to you and makes an improper suggestion. Well, you're the adult. You're the one that's supposed to say, no, this isn't proper. Um, where are your parents?
Yeah, yeah,
That's our part to play as adults. Is even though and then that's a problem. When we have the power, children depend on us.
yeah,
And so for one of them to be victimized and then be called the instigator is just, that goes way beyond what I can understand.
yeah. Also, I mean, so that her brother's 19. How old were her parents, the people who were listed as the parents on the birth certificate?
That's a good question. They were actually, that was a tail end of their family, so they were much older. I want to say they were in their 50s, maybe
Okay.
60s.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, because a 50-year-old woman typically can't have babies anymore.
Right.
So that, I mean, that when you're telling me that, or telling that part of the story, I'm thinking, if the 19-year-old isn't their oldest, then there's a high likelihood that it's just not a believable situation to be on that
Right.
birth certificate in the first place. Is that kind of did that have anything to do with why the doctor got caught eventually?
We never, like, there's lots of rumors. We heard that his license was revoked for that specific case, but I
Mm,
can't say that. Like the things I've said that I'm sure of,
yeah,
I'm sure of.
yeah.
But that I don't know if it was that particular case or one that was questionable off to the side.
You don't have any. How old were you when you left?
I was 24, I want to say.
Oh, so you got married and left within a year or two.
Yes,
Okay.
my oldest, actually, the same doctor that got his license revoked delivered my oldest son.
Hmm. Okay.
So, so I mean, he was like the everything for all the Amish and Mennonites there. But
Yeah.
it was about 2 years after I got married that we left.
Yeah. All right. How did leaving come about? Like, how did that finally happen?
Well, it's kind of funny. I mean, for me, it's funny. I don't know. People listening, and I want them to understand the way I understand it. I don't know if I can get that across, but Mennonites and Amish are like so cohesive together. Even if groups don't agree on specifics, they still respect each other enough to where if one member wants to transfer to another group, it's the church's decision, not the individual's decision.
Yeah.
And so I had to be really careful how I walked in here to make sure that I didn't, you know, I, these scandals were enough. So if I say, well, I'm leaving, I'm going somewhere else, they said, well, are you dissatisfied? That was going to be enough to get me kicked out with an excommunication. So I just said, I told my brother, I said, I'm finished with it. I'm going somewhere else. So I said, you know, that group in North Texas that we used to be a part of? I said, why don't we go back there? And he goes, oh, you're nuts. He said, don't go back there. Well, I'm autistic. I like what's familiar.
Yeah.
I always have. So I went back to the North Texas group. And my brother followed me down. Like, he was almost here before I was, after he told me I was nuts, you know. But so I contacted the minister down here, or the bishop minister, and said, this is my intention to move down to this church. Is that okay? And he said, yeah, that's fine. And so I called Marvin, which is actually, I talked to him in the church parking lot. That's what I did after church. I says, I want to move back to where we came from, and I would like to get your blessing to do so. And I already knew this was going to be a battle, because they thought this church here in North Texas was super liberal. They thought they were like wickedly liberal.
Yeah.
And so I knew it was going to be a battle, but he called me a week later and he says, I can't give you a clear release because of your oh man, I wish I could remember. You consistently go against our standards, or the words he used meant that.
Mm.
He said, you have a constant disregard for standard, which meant the rules.
Yeah.
I said, can you give me an example? He said, well, you didn't wear your black hat when you went to Texas. Well, I had told him that. He had asked me, he said, did you do everything in our standards when you went to visit Texas? Did you keep all our standards? I said, Marvin, I think there was once I didn't wear my black hat when I was in my car. Well, he used that against me, and he says, because of that, I'm not going to give you a clear release.
Yeah.
Anyway, I called the minister down here, and I says, I don't know what to do. I'm trying. And so he called Marvin, the bishop, and they worked it out between themselves, and I got a clear release. I don't know how that happened still, but.
Okay, so your wife is raised in this. Like, she's never known the outside world, right?
Correct.
How did that go about? You're married. I'd imagine it sounds like the atmosphere is one in which maybe you not specifically, but people in general probably can't trust that their spouse would keep something from the bishop or the ministry. Like,
that's correct.
So it seems like it would almost be like almost kind of like a little conspiracy to kind of position, like have those conversations with your wife about leaving and stuff like that, because your wife left with you, right?
She did.
How did that happen? How did those conversations happen? Like, as you're coming to this realization that, like, this is not for me, how do you talk to your wife, who this is the only thing she's ever known? How do you talk to her about, first of all, leaving to Texas, and then eventually you left the Mennonite church completely, right?
So when I started courting my wife, I didn't really have feelings for her, but I came to a place after we got married a few months that I actually loved her, you know, like I can't describe, unless you've ever been in that situation. You don't know this person. You can't even hold their hand.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to sit, you know, you have a 2-foot gap between you wherever you sit.
Yeah.
When you visit, you're always with her family. And how do you come to love somebody like that? I mean, you can't start loving them, because that's a obsession. Sorry. And then with the fact that the women are, well, they're held down, you know, for the most part, they just do what the men tell them.
Yeah.
My wife came from a very good family, and her mom and dad were very devoted to each other. So I think that's why I got by. I'm just guessing. I think that's why she supported me through all of this. And I think I made sense to her when I said this was not right. She could see it for herself. And because of her example, the example of her father and mother, being devoted to each other. She was devoted to me. And I thank the Lord for that. I just say, my family's broken, like my dad and my mom, and it was nasty and bad. I'm like, I don't know what I did to deserve a woman who supported me when I was angry and bitter.
Does your wife still? I'd assume she has family still in this church. Does she
Yes.
keep in contact with them, or is that not even allowed?
No, she keeps in contact. Well, some of them disown her, but some of them, it's kind of weird. There's a family gathering in honor of her late father. He passed not too long ago. And so we got together for that, and some of them chose to be absent from that because we're the most liberal. I say liberal. We're still Christians, right? But we're not conservative like they are. And so because of that, they chose not to be there.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it. I'm curious about that because for your wife, especially, like having it be the only thing she knows, and the way that you guys end up getting married, not being a typical courtship where you're getting to know each other on a more intimate level and everything prior to getting married. It just seems like that's got to be. I mean, I'm sure you've had conversations with her about this. Like,
Yes.
what does she have to say? It like, or what did she
You
have
know
to
what she
say at the
says?
time? Yeah.
She says, I'm so embarrassed and I'm so sorry for what you must have been experiencing because when we got married, she knew nothing of the marriage relationship,
Mm,
nothing. And in a way that's sweet and innocent, and in a way that's pretty rough.
yeah.
And she says, I'm so sorry for that. I wish my parents would have taught me more.
Yeah. Man. What is so you leave and you said you consider yourself Christian still. Is that right? Do you go
Yes.
to any specific churches or anything, or is it just more like you believe in the Christian God and you
No,
kind
I
of
go to church, and this is funny too, and it's not really funny at all. But so Mennonites and Catholic are directly opposed.
hmm,
I don't know if you knew that or not,
no, I didn't.
but Catholicism was a direct opposition to Mennonites, and for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And they consider Catholics to be their greatest opponent, spiritually speaking. Well, Lutheran is the second, and we're Lutheran.
Hmm,
So my my wife and I and kids were now Lutheran, and so that flies in the face of Anabaptist because they both Catholic and Lutheran baptize children.
yeah.
And the Mennonites started out as Anabaptist, which means second Baptist, second baptism.
Yeah. I'm I was raised Catholic, so I'm curious, like what is it that's why are they so diametrically opposed? Like why are they opposites? Is it because of when I go to if I go to a Catholic church, I haven't been in a while, but if I go to one, there's gold. There's it's very decorative, like a stained glass windows. It's pretty. Like they
Right.
do there's a big aesthetic thing to it, and it's very like the priests and bishops and everything. They wear their garments are very they're showy. They're
Right.
definitely not plain. Is this what the problem is? It's just how
No,
they
there's I could start naming. The first one is child baptism. That is
mm,
the biggest divide. The and the communion as well. But there are so many differences. It'd be easier for me to say how they're similar than how they're different.
yeah.
For two religions to say they're Christian and be so different, I don't even know how that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So what were the you, you don't have resentment toward the church anymore that you left.
Oh,
Um,
sometimes, but
so
not much.
I'm curious. Like it seems like you have some things that you held on to in a positive light, what are those things? Like, what are the things that you take away from your experience that you hold, that you just have value in?
Before I've never told this story outside of my family, but if you'll allow me, I'll tell a story to tell you why I value
Yeah.
where the hardship. So I want this to be first. Anybody, um, anybody listening to know that this is a success story. This isn't, oh, look what happened to me. Yeah, things happened to me. Yeah, it wasn't fair, but without it, I wouldn't be who I am. Like, say you take all that away and give me all easy stuff, and then everything's a latte and everything's hash brown in the morning for breakfast. I mean, I would cease to be who I am today, and I would be somebody totally different, probably with much less worth as what I can offer. I had a dream, and once again, I haven't shared this with anybody outside of my family. And I think I've mentioned to you already that I have very significant dreams.
Mm-hmm.
But this is one of the ones that was just for me personally. I had this dream where I found myself back at the very first day I was introduced to the Tennessee Mennonites. And I look down and I see my white Nike Air shoes or Nike Flight. And they haven't even been colored with a magic marker yet. And I look down and I have all the knowledge that I have right now. But I'm like this 14-year-old boy. And I'm like, shoot, God gave me this chance to change the course of my life for better. And I'm thinking, well, what? I mean, I have all this knowledge of how life is going to go. I have knowledge of who's going to be president. I have all this knowledge. I said, what couldn't I do? I'm capable of anything. And in my dream, I start changing things from what they had been. I go into a conversation with a young man that actually happened, and I change the conversation. And I become very elated in my dream, like almost euphoric, because I'm changing these things, and it's going to be so significant. There is no limit. And I wake up, and the euphoria is still with me. Like I am literally tingling in my scalp because I am so like almost high, you know. And I go out and I'm having my coffee and I'm still high, and I'm thinking, well, what all could I change, you know? And all of a sudden I realize there's one truth I'd forgotten, that if I change any one thing in the past, my family ceases to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I change anything at 14, then the events don't happen the way they happened before. And yeah, my life, I could have money, I could have whatever else. Say I was able to change things. But I cease to be who I am today.
Yeah.
I cease to have what I have today. And what is more valuable than a loyal wife, a loving wife, and loving family? There is nothing more valuable than that. Nothing.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I realized what I would lose if I was able to change the past. And so I'm at peace with so the bitterness and the anger, it faded because I realized that in order for me to be who I am today and have what I have, that was necessary.
I love that.
And I don't know if that affects you at all, but it affected me so, like the whole day I went through that day, I felt like I was in another parallel universe.
Yeah.
It was ultra significant to me. And I love my family. And so how can I be bitter? How can I be angry when I realized that that was all part of my life? That was all of the building blocks of who I am as a person.
Yeah. When you guys got out, when you finally left the church, you're a curious person. So you have access to these things, these resources that you were cut off from for a long time. And I'd imagine your wife saw worldly things from a distance occasionally.
Yeah.
But she didn't get to interact with them, like not in person. She might see somebody listening to music, but not be a part of it. So I'm curious about that experience of like completely going away, getting into an environment where you have access to this information, computers again, music, TV, all of this stuff, how that was for you. And then also for your wife, having never even, I mean, you actually had some experience with that, although, I mean, technology changed over 10 years.
Oh
But
yeah.
I'm curious how this went for you guys.
So when I joined, or when my mom drugged me into that cult, I was actually in accelerated computer courses in eighth grade
Mm,
in the school there. They had I guess it was like a program for gifted individuals that were gifted in digital technology. This is before Windows.
yeah,
When I got out, I could hardly run a computer. The technology had shifted so dramatically, I could barely run one.
yeah,
And so I still digitally inclined, but you can imagine the fire had kind of smoldered down to coals.
mm,
I enjoyed it and I learned how to use it, but I was no longer the leading edge. So
yeah,
that was kind of that's probably a good thing.
yeah,
Otherwise, I might have become absorbed in something that my wife did not understand.
yeah.
So it took her much longer than it took me to accept I don't know, the progressiveness of technology.
Mm,
But there were things that happened, like right after we got married, I had an appendectomy. And when I went to have my stitches removed in the doctor's office, we were sitting there in the waiting room, and there was a song playing that I had known since I was a boy, and I was like, "Oh, that's a great song." And I mean, I'm still this cult Mennonite,
yeah,
Amish Mennonite, and I was like, "Oh, you hear that song? That's a great song." And she's like, she's listening. She goes, "That is pretty." So like I'm super lucky that I have a relationship with a woman who's wise enough to forge a relationship with her husband that's above that with her uh, needs to conform to the church.
yeah. What was the situation with books in the church? Like, could you read? I would imagine you can't read many books. Like, they probably banned most of them. But
Yes.
was there reading at all? I mean, obviously, you have your church, the Bible, the church documents, stuff like that. But were there books that you could just read?
So, and this is going to sound like a sob story. Once again, it is who I am, and I've accepted that. But I always wanted to go to college.
Mm,
Um, it's the thing I always want. I love academics. I love reading. I would be one of those people like, oh, you've ever seen Community? Uh, the college, it has Pierce. I'm sorry, Chevy Chase is Pierce.
I I vaguely think I might, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah. That's who I would be. I'd just constantly be going to college, not
Yeah,
because I wanted a career, but because I wanted to learn.
yeah, yeah.
And so in the Mennonites, they don't allow anything above the eighth grade. In this particular sect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that wasn't acceptable to me. I wanted to learn. I mean, it didn't matter what it was. I wanted to learn it.
Yeah.
And at one point, I had gone down to the local Radio Shack, and they had a community computer that anybody could use. And I started an email account and everything. And I mean, I'm this Mennonite, but I wanted to stay in touch with my dad. That's why I did it. So, like eighth grade, you get cut off from all types of learning, and so I went to Goodwill, and I found these college books, physics and mathematics and history and whatnot. And I would buy them for $3, $4, fairly cheap. They're college books, and I'd bring them home. And the ones I could understand, I reread them over and over again. And I shared them with one of the young men there. Say, this book, there's one as a physics book that I really, really liked. And I shared it with this other young man. And I said, hey, check this out. This is really cool stuff. Well, he went and told the bishop on me.
Mm,
And I got told that if I did not stop buying books, I would be excommunicated because that was pride against God.
yeah. Oh, that's horrible. I mean, the reason I love books, and I know you do too. So that's why I wanted to ask about that, because like, there's been points in my life where maybe I didn't read much for a couple years here and there, but then there's time. It's something I've always kind of gone back to, and it's like this. It's this way of learning about the world and other people's experience without having to go through everything they went through. So I think books are just so valuable. What's the What's the first book that you remember reading after leaving?
Oh, dang. You mean after leaving the cult?
Yeah.
I would say A Tale of Two Cities.
Okay.
That was probably the first, but I had already read it, but
Yeah.
I reread it like, oh, wait, no, I'm a Mark Twain person.
Nice. Nice.
He is my favorite modern author.
Yeah.
And I think I read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and then I bought his complete short stories
Yeah.
and read that one
Nice. Nice.
because they didn't. Those people did not allow anything Mark Twain because he was foolish, is what
Yeah.
they said.
Mark Twain is. I love Mark Twain. I read so much Mark Twain. One year. This was probably when I was like early 20s. I went through a Mark Twain phase where I read so much that for like a few months I was kind of mimicking his writing style, and when I'd write I'd have his like sarcasm in there and stuff like that. So
So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well did you pull it off?
oh, I'm sure not very well. Like
Hmm.
maybe I mean, I don't think anyone can pull off Mark Twain like Mark Twain. So yeah, I'm not even gonna say any. It doesn't even register. But Mark Twain is. I mean, he's been involved in when we see like the political correctness and the stuff like that creeping in. Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn was one of the earlier targets of that kind of stuff, and it always pissed me off because when I read that book, and I'm like, wait, I understand the word that is used in that book that is offensive, but the story itself is the opposite of a racist story. And it's amazing that we would try to ban a book and call it racist because of the words that are used, not the message that's in the book. Because Tom is
I
the
agree.
father. Tom is Huckleberry Finn's father figure in that story. And it's about a kid who is rejecting the past, rejecting the ways of the current era, the current age of the time of like seeing black people as inferior and a property, and he's struggling with this. He's grappling with this, like, he's connecting with Tom, and he's evolving, essentially seeing this
Right.
man as a human being rather than what he's been conditioned by society to see this guy as. And I just find it incredible that people would overlook the message of that book and say, well, this word is used a bunch in that book, so it's racist.
Well, can I expand on that a little
Yeah.
bit?
Yeah.
If you read it with understanding, you'll see that Mark Twain was actually making fun of the people who use that word loosely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Think about it. So at one point, I think it's towards the end of actually, it's at the very end of the book. I think his Aunt Sally was it? And Huck Finn runs into her. Oh, you're Tom. He goes, yeah, ma'am, I'm Tom. This is Huck. So he plays the part of Tom. And she goes, well, why weren't you here a little sooner? And he goes, well, the boat ran on a little thing there, ran up and blew a cylinder head. And she goes, oh my goodness, was anybody hurt? And he goes, nah, nobody was hurt, only, and then he uses the word, was killed. So if you think about what he was actually saying, Mark Twain was actually saying that this is ridiculous that we don't count these people as human.
Yeah. And it was. I mean, it's one of the things that just, by today's standards, Mark Twain might be, like, if he were reincarnated and just who he was, he might be backwards. Like, he might have some views that are just not in line with current views. But I think everything needs to be taken in context. And in the context of his time, Mark Twain was a progressive, definitely progressive, So,
yeah, but I mean, can I expand on that even further? Yeah. Is like anybody that's made an impact in society, anybody has been controversial.
Yeah.
You take Mark Twain. If you said he wouldn't fit into society today, he would actually be grateful he didn't fit in.
Yeah.
Like, he was not the type to want to fit in. And you take Nikola Tesla. he was so different from the normal person that people made fun of him, but he didn't care. He made a huge difference though.
Yeah.
So like we need more people that are willing to stand up and just be real and contribute based on their gifts,
Yeah.
and not be so worried about what people will think. And I mean, I'm be a little worried about it, but not excessively.
Yeah. It's something I've had to learn over time. I've always cared what people think. I've always, rejection has always been hard on me. Not that I mean, I've been accepted by my peers a lot, but I'm also like, I can be a little different from people my age. Like, it's one of the reasons I like social media and being able to meet people like you and everyone else that I get to interact with, because when you're confined to just the people that you can meet in person in your real life, sometimes it's hard to find that group of people that you really resonate with. So I love the internet for the fact that I can find people that are curious, that want to talk about these things, that aren't just my gamer friends. That if I start, not that all my gamer friends, because some of them are very open people, but I have some people that I would game with where it's like, we're talking and it's like, oh, Artie's talking about politics again. And like, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't always want to talk about just non-consequential things. Like, some of this stuff matters. Like, and for me, it's like I don't get offended and stuff like that. So when other people do it, it's always been kind of hard in that sense. So I love the internet and being able to interact with people, expand.
Yeah, right. But getting offended. I mean, let's. Can we talk about that a second?
Yeah,
It's like what is getting offended? So like I get offended at you, say, but why?
yeah,
Like like is it because you disagree with me or you didn't affirm my position, or why did I get offended with you? And then you say, well, is it a strength or a weakness to get offended? And I would say almost in all cases it's a weakness.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there are things that, I don't know, would that even be offended? Like, if you see somebody do something that you are just not okay with morally, somebody committing a murder or something, or stealing from people and stuff like that, you're just not okay with it. And I've done more than my fair share of immoral things and things that I'm not proud of. But
Hmm.
if you see somebody doing something that you don't agree with, is that being offended, or is it seeing a difference that you're not okay with?
Yeah, I'm still stuck on the you did some things that you're not proud of. No, uh, uh, but no, I'd say offense is normally where you feel personally encroached upon. Like people don't get offended that. I mean, I'm not even sure what the illustration is here, but offense is almost always a very personal item.
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
Um,
yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say is like I found the most easily offendable people to be the ones that have very strong viewpoints that can't back them up.
Yeah,
Like normally speaking, that's not always the truth, but on average, that's the truth.
yeah,
And and I'm not saying I never get offended because there have been times like with my dad that I've gotten offended recently, but it's on a very personal level.
yeah. Um, I'll expand a little bit. Earlier on in my life, had I not been pulled away from certain situations or just gotten away with not getting too wrapped up in certain things, I would have probably been down on a different path and probably ended up in juvenile detention, and who knows from there. Like, I could have ended up in jail down the road and stuff like that. So I'm grateful that I had the parents that I had to kind of like try to steer me clear. Although for all their attempts, I went against their standards quite a bit. And, I was rebellious and got mixed up with people who, just weren't doing the right things. And I think they're all doing all right now too. But, I was just lost when I was younger. So I could have definitely I could have been in a different situation had things worked out a little bit differently. So I'm grateful for where I'm at. But
Yeah, and I'm glad for where you're at too. You just your podcast that and your spaces and all that.
Yeah.
I think they're wholesome, and
Yeah.
I appreciate them. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and yeah, I think you're right when it comes to being offended. I think it's more of a you thing normally. And there's a Trump comes to mind in this regard. Um, and I don't like to talk about Trump too much usually just because like people are so focused on his personality that he takes up so much of the dialogue when it comes to politics and stuff. But I did notice I was telling you before this, I was pretty anti-Trump during his first run for office, and then I became a little bit more receptive to him over time after seeing some things play out. But I noticed that a lot of the people who are most ardently opposed to Donald Trump, to like they get offended. They don't like him. Um, I find that a lot of them, not all of them, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but some of the people that I know personally, when I step back and I'm like, you actually have a lot of those traits that you see toxic. Like you have a lot of overlap with that. And I've seen this play out a few times where it's like these people who are just, they think he's evil and they just think he's the worst. It's like, I sometimes think that he's holding up a mirror and they're seeing that aspect of
Hmm.
themselves in a mirror and they hate it. They can't stand it. They can't stand that this is the person leading the country who's reflecting back to them their negative traits, and some of that might be distorted too, of course. Like some of what they might see is not necessarily being reflected but what they're perceiving.
Yeah,
Have you noticed that
that's a
ever?
great thought. Yeah, yeah. You should expand on that. Like there's a greater thought there, and I I think, and I mean maybe I'm being too general with this thought, but anybody who wholly supports the Democrats or anybody who wholly supports the Republicans, they're lacking. Uh, um, and I got to be careful with this because I'm not trying to make any enemies here, but they need to have some personal beliefs that they can have without aligning with the Republicans or the
Yeah.
Democrats.
Yeah.
It's not necessary to align with everybody all the time. Like I voted for Donald Trump, but I think that he is an attention whore, and I'm not trying to be mean here. I think he loves attention.
Yeah.
The guy can't get enough of himself.
Yep.
But at the same time, he's great at business, so I think he'll run the country decently well. Like I can recognize these deficits that he has. I don't have to agree with him, but I can vote for him. So
Yeah.
people need to be free to be themselves and believe in, like, form individual beliefs based on their experience and their thought processes rather than just swallowing the pill, whatever that is.
Yeah. And another thing is like people, it's frustrating to see people demonize everyone who voted for Trump or whoever. People demonize people who voted for Kamala or Biden too, but it's this self righteousness that you see where people are like, "Oh, I'm a good person because of my political
Mm,
beliefs," and you have these
right.
different political beliefs. And I think Trump is a narcissist. I think he is a racist and all these things. And because I believe that, I'm going to assume that if you voted for him, that's what you want. You want racism. You want this. Like people have a tendency to think that the reason that people voted for somebody is the reasons that they didn't, which is just backwards. Most people pragmatically vote for whoever they think is going to be the better choice between the two options that we tend to get.
Right. But I mean, I'll just throw in there. I think our education system is lacking, and I
Yeah.
mean, maybe you disagree with that,
No, I
but
fully agree.
so like if people could be a little more educated in regards to, I go back to the soccer or the Plato's Republic. If you read through that, I mean, it's kind of boring, but then it's kind of like really moving because he's like, well, we can't allow this, we can't allow that, and here's the reasons why.
Yeah.
You start to get a sense of the high and lofty, the noble. So he even in there says we can't allow the poets because then the poets talk about how these different gods were jealous or whatever else. So we can't allow people to have thoughts that gods are jealous.
Yeah.
Um, I guess what I'm trying to say is, and it's something that's been told to me, you need to you need to think for yourself. You need to you need to get your logic working. You need to climb the stairs yourself, not just depend on what people tell you or what sounds compelling, but try to think through it and try to develop a sense of, of moral good for everybody. So like, if I want what's good for you and what's good for my family and what's good for my community, well, what will I espouse?
Yeah.
You know, if we could educate our citizens to aim for that, wouldn't we be better off?
Yeah. Yeah. I think being able to think for yourself is extremely important. I wholeheartedly agree that our education system is broken. I don't think I learned much between grades 5 or 4 and my senior year. I don't really remember learning much,
Hmm.
like in school. Like I learned, but it was like life experience. Like it was like learning through friends and learning through reading and stuff like that. I was kicked out of class a lot, sent out into the hall. That was like, I went to
Oh,
Catholic
dang.
school until 8th grade, and they loved to just kick me out in the hall. And it's like, at least give me a damn book or something, you know? Like that was the punishment all the time because I was disruptive. But I'm my personality is fairly disagreeable. Like I have no problem, like like ruffling some feathers, saying that I disagree with something, and I think it kind of saved me in the end. Like,
Yeah. Well, I need to be interviewing you now. I forget my story. I mean, you sounds like there's a good old story behind the scenes here. Say, Artie, tell me about your school experience.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't look at school fondly, to be honest. Like, it was there were some fun experiences, but when I look back on it, I think it was mostly a waste of time, and I think we could have. They all wanted to say I'm ADHD. Like they all wanted to put me on drugs and stuff like that. My parents didn't want to. I'm grateful that they refused to put me on drugs because I took Adderall later in life as an adult, and it was still a very hard drug. I consider it one of the worst drugs I've taken. Um, I can't imagine having been put on that when I was 12 years old. Like I would have been a completely different person today. So
I think any drug that alters your state of being should be very carefully looked at before it's
yeah,
administered,
yeah,
especially for children.
yeah, yeah. Well, Ryan, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I love to ask people about books. We talked about books a little bit, but what are some books that you recommend? What are some books that have really resonated with you in your life or just you found a lot of value in?
I have several. I'm just work of literature is The Last of the Mohicans.
Mm,
The movie isn't worth crap, but the book. I mean, they changed the movie from the book. I
yeah,
don't know if you're aware of that,
yeah,
but the book is great. It's James Fenimore Cooper, I believe, wrote it, and he has a great way of painting word pictures. Any of Mark Twain's works, I would recommend. And then you get into the say self-help or the inspirational. I would say Jordan Peterson has some of the best books out there. So I don't know how else to recommend. The 12 Rules for Life is it may not be something that moves you to tears or anything, but it's a very good piece of advice
yeah,
all the way around.
yeah. Yeah, it's a very good book. Have you read Maps of Meaning?
I have. Well, I listened to it, but yes.
What's your opinion on that?
I actually did not like it as much as I like 12 Rules for Life.
Oh, really? Okay. I like it
I
more.
don't know. Yeah, I didn't know why. It could have just been where I was in life at the moment,
Yeah.
but I like 12 Rules for Life better.
Yeah. 12 Rules would definitely, I mean, he was a better writer by the time he wrote 12 Rules. Maps of Meaning is his first book. I just thought it was interesting because it's like the depth at which he's exploring these concepts were pretty cool. It's pretty interesting and it's kind of like his start, like that's where he
Right.
started with that. And so it was cool to get his take on earlier on, get a feel for where he was at. So I really liked it.
There is one other book I'd recommend for anybody out there that, and it's not a storybook and it's not inspirational. It's called Conceptual Physics by Paul Hewitt.
Hmm.
And if you like textbooks at all, that changed my life when I was about 16 years old, and I read it. It's not the algebra and calculus. It's just conceiving how physics work.
Yeah.
Very good book.
This would be a book. This is the book that you bought for like a few bucks.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's one of them that I bought
Yeah.
from Goodwill.
Really cool. Cool. Well, Ryan, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I want to have you back on sometime, get into some other conversations around
Philosophy,
the
man.
philosophy. Yeah, I love it. But before we wrap up, can you tell listeners where they can find you on X and anything else you want to share, or anywhere you have any presence that you want to share?
I'm I'm not like I have a YouTube channel, but it's not something I promote really. I mean, it's probably more for me than it is for listeners. Although my son and I probably plan to add some more content here coming up pretty quick,
Cool.
but that's a fresh angle.
Yeah.
Um, and it's about philosophy and then some growing up stories. Um, but I actually had a couple questions for you, Artie, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Go for it.
Just for fun. I mean, I was thinking about this before you got on. So you obviously enjoy interviewing people and sort of asking questions, and you're curious.
Yeah.
So say there's three people that you can interview, or I mean, three people forced on you. You're going to interview these people regardless,
Mm-hmm.
and you can ask each one of them one question. What would you ask them? The first one's Jordan Peterson.
Oh, Jordan Peterson. Oh, that's hard. I would love to interview him, but I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I'd have to really think about that because he's been interviewed so much that I'd have to think about what he's been asked. I have to think about what he says.
I know the feeling.
I'd probably I'd probably ask him to un I don't know. I'd unravel the battle between good and evil that he sees in the world right now. Something like that.
I
Um,
love it because he has some really like he takes out of the Bible these parables and then he'll unravel them.
yeah,
It's sort of like what you're talking about. I
yeah,
like that.
yeah. Something like that.
Okay, Joe Rogan's the next.
Oh, Joe Rogan. I'd ask him about interviewing people. So I'd want to ask him what was the most shocking interview he did? Like, what was the interview that just blew his mind the most? Because I've listened to a few interviews of his, and like, he's privileged enough where he is as a podcaster that if you have a big enough profile or know people with a big enough profile and you can and you have something important to say and Joe Rogan gets any whiff of it at all, like you're going to be on Rogan's show. Like he gets to be that guy that drops serious stuff, has like revelations come on his podcast for the first time ever. So I
Right.
would want to ask him like, what's that interview that you just didn't, you had no idea what you were stepping into prior.
He's like, oh, that's okay. We don't have to talk about that. You
Yeah,
know how he is.
yeah,
But then he always leads back into it.
yeah, yeah.
That's funny. That would be a good question. Our last one, we have an infamous celebrity. What would you ask Hitler if you could ask him one question?
Hmm. If I could ask Hitler one question, I'd ask him if he would do it all over again. Because
Word.
because he didn't achieve what I think he wanted. Like he wanted this Germany, this German superpower, and of course he wanted to wipe out the Jews and all this stuff. He wanted to do pretty horrible things, but in his mind, I believe while normal people we can't wrap our heads around why he would justify the decisions that he made. I think I don't think he was crazy in the sense that like he didn't have a working mind. I think he believed he was doing the right thing in, at least for the most part. Or he believed the ends justify the means.
Right.
So I'd want to ask him, looking back, knowing what happened, would he do all that again? I think he probably would, actually.
Right. Well, and the way I see it is, it seems almost like if you read history flowing, that the Jews were incidental. And I say that it's almost like he just picked them at random to unify the nation.
Yeah,
Now, I'm sure he had reasons within himself that he didn't express clearly, but it's almost like he just randomly picked a group that was just a burr in his sea because of banking and finance, maybe.
yeah,
But
yeah,
and then it grew, and then it grew into a thing where they were being, slaughtered.
yeah. There's a really good book. My grandfather read it, and after uh, he died when I was in my 20s, and I asked my uncle, who is also a reader, I'm like, hey, are there any books that my grandpa really liked? And he's like, yeah, there's this one called The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. So I read that book, and William Schreier, something like that is the
Yeah.
author's name. Highly recommend it. I learned more about what actually happened during that time. This journalist was actually in Germany at the beginning. Like he like saw it. He went to rallies and stuff like that. He was reporting on everything, so he got a
Dang.
firsthand account of what happened, and he got his hands on a lot of the papers that were uncovered after the Allies won. So he had a really, like, he just had detailed information. It's not a short book. You're talking 500-600 pages. Not an easy read, but I love that book. I actually have it. If I could show you my bookshelf, like all my books are uh, the cover, the spine is out, right? So you can read this.
Yeah.
That one's not, because there's there's a Nazi symbol on it, and I'm like, if I'm in the background and if that's in the background, the last thing I want is for people to see this swastika and like get an
Yeah.
impression like, oh, this isn't the kind of podcast I want to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just,
Well, is it the hardest read you have?
hmm.
What would you say the hardest read you have back there is?
So I have these books called the Great Books, and it's not just one book. It's like Western literature from the Greeks all the way until I think they stop in like the 20th century. Um, Those are hard to read just because they're small, but that's like authors of all times. Some of those earlier books are harder for me to read. Like Iliad and
Ah,
Odyssey were like not easy
oh,
for me to get
yeah, no,
read
no.
through.
And if anybody, and I'm not trying to be mean, but if anybody says, "Oh, I love the Iliad," I'm thinking, man, you're not being real.
Yeah,
That's what my initial thought is.
yeah. I liked the movie Troy, and it was cool to read the Iliad. It wasn't worth it just for this sake, but it was interesting to see all of the things that didn't line up with the original.
Right,
Because I thought Troy was a good show,
right,
but
right,
yeah, it didn't line up at all. Like it was so off. But
right.
as far as like books aside that I've read, uh, there was one recently, Frames of Mind by Howard Gardner, I think is his name.
Hmm.
I actually invited him on the podcast. He wasn't available. It was it wasn't my favorite book.
I'm
There were
betting.
some interesting things, but it was just a very technical read, and it was like,
Right.
I didn't get as much from it. So yeah, I would say that was one of the harder books I've read.
I have one called Creation's Tiny Mystery,
Mm.
and that is the hardest read I possibly could advise anybody to read. But it's actually it's a nuclear physicist writing about granite. Um, he was at Oak Ridge Labs in Tennessee, and he discovered these halos in granite from
Yeah.
uranium and other radioactive isotopes,
Yeah.
and he describes it in the book. And I'm not saying it's a book that most people would ever enjoy reading, but it's very informative. But you have to read some paragraphs 4 times in a row just to try to understand what the guy is trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I find, I've explained this a few times to people, but I find that when I first read a book, if it's an author I've never read before, I'm slow on the first like chapter or something like that.
Hmm.
But eventually you pick up on an author's flow, and I typically read books. I listen to some audiobooks, but for the most part I just read.
That's the best.
I like it because it's meditative to me. I can't be doing anything else. If I'm
Right.
listening to an audiobook, I can easily start browsing on the internet or something like that, and then all of a sudden I realize I haven't been listening for the last 20 minutes. But when I'm reading, I've gotten to the point where I rarely get that stuff where I had it this morning when I was reading. Earlier when I was reading, you get the point where like I've read a page and I don't remember anything I read. You know, like everyone gets that. I don't have that too much anymore. I feel like I've mostly tackled that, but every once in a while I get that. I read today where I read a page and I'm like, oh, I didn't really pick up on that. But I feel like if you read an author, at first it's hard because you don't know. I call it the flow of their writing, but after you read a chapter or two, then it's like, okay, I get their rhythm, I get their flow, and then it's like it just flows and you can read it and it's more fluid. But it always takes time to get started. And I would say like that Frames of Mind book, and there's other ones that I've read that I just never get that flow down, and it's just a battle to get through every single sentence because you just can't just quickly read it. You just can't read it easily. You have to like focus on every single word and to get through it. Those are what I consider the hardest reads.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, but yeah.
I had those questions for you about the 3 people to ask one question about. I didn't mean to. I know you've got something coming up here in about 30 minutes. So
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. So I don't mind being asked questions.
I actually think it'd be fun if I could interview you for your podcast. That would be fun.
Yeah, I'll be completely honest. There's a certain amount of anxiety that would give me. I have a certain amount of control as the interviewer. Like I get to ask people questions, and I don't have to like that. I don't love talking about myself sometimes. Like I don't mind revealing some stuff, but I don't know, I'm just not the best at answering questions about myself sometimes. In certain regards. So,
I get it.
Yeah.
But what if it was just a conversation and it was just a fun, I hate to say Theo Vaughn, but it's kind of like anytime that there's any questions that he might not like, he deflects with some ludicrous humor somewhere,
Yeah. Yeah.
You could do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. We should do it sometime. I'd be down.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
But
I've never interviewed anybody, but I think I could start with you, man. You're a good guy.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm looking forward to doing it again sometime.
Appreciate it, Artie. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, definitely.